I'm fascinated by how you have taken yourself as a human being. Yeah, but then to brand yourself as a dadpreneur, I love it. Talk about that.
Listen, I still think it's one of the most rewarding journeys any one of us can experience in our lifetimes, and that's being a parent. I really didn't quite understand it, getting into it because we were young, having kids young. Like I was barely mid 20s. My wife was a couple years younger than me. We were the first of all of our social connections
Yeah.
to have kids, which is cool because it was a novelty with all of our friends, right? Everyone's, oh, like new baby, right? And so we had lots of volunteer babysitters and that. So it was neat. But at the same time, we didn't have a lot of friends with kids at the time. So we tended to hang out with older people. And when I say older people, like just people from a decade or more older than us. So that is a bit of a generational gap. And the thing is with this, is I started to connect with a lot of other professionals and fatherly professionals and
Yeah.
started learn through that mentorship and modeling and just really that mutual support. And I remember someone saying it, and I don't remember where I picked it up, but I heard this idea of being a dadpreneur. And I was like, that's just me. That's what I want to be because I'm a dad first and I'm an entrepreneur second. But actually, the two coexist and they're not mutually exclusive, at least in my life. And it's like, yeah, that's it. Because again, I believe language is very important, but especially the language we use to talk to ourselves and about ourselves. And we know that thoughts often form into what we produce in our life. I am very selective on the kind of language that I use. Even that term dating my wife, again, very intentional with that language. And I invite others, be intentional with what you use to describe yourself or to communicate, you know?
I love the word intentional
Yes.
because when you state it, you have to follow through with it, or else what the hell's the point of using it? And I'll
Sure.
suggest to you, it's many humans rarely use it.
Mm, mm.
When I read again your language,
Yeah.
you're dating your wife,
Mhm.
it struck me that it was intentional. There was a
Yeah.
purpose behind it. Expand upon that.
Without letting all the skeletons out of the closet, because heck, it's only our first conversation. Got to save some good stories for next time. No, but seriously, 15 years ago, I went through a massive shift, personally and professionally. And to be fair, it was out of necessity. There comes a place where we are all fairly change averse. Let's just be honest. Like changes are
Mhm.
not easy. Otherwise, we wake up every morning being like, hey, more change, universe. Come on, just challenge me.
Yeah.
We
Yes.
don't do that. And 15 years ago, I was in a situation where I realized that my personal and professional life were literally on the edge, that precipice of ultimate failure. And what I mean by that is just I myself, that connector between my personal life, my professional life, and everything else in between it, just getting really accountable and honest that my alcohol consumption had got way out of control, like way out of
Mhm.
control. And it was a
Mhm.
15-year habit from age 17 to 32. I think the longest stint I'd ever done is like a sober January, right? Like
Mhm.
drinking was a big part of my life.
I can
Because,
relate to that.
oh,
I'll step up to the table with you since you're
please.
clearly going to be vulnerable with me. I can relate to that. So I put down alcohol 7 years ago,
Right
and it
on.
wasn't for any. I, it, I didn't wake up go, this is causing me a lot of grief. But when I reflect upon it, it was
Mhm.
causing me a lot of grief,
Yeah.
and I was not making good decisions. I was not a good human being. I wasn't enabled to live the life I wanted to live.
Yeah. Thank you, man. What you just did, I want to say thank you. Because I know as men who identify as men,
Yes.
this is a skill that we've had to develop. Okay. And
Oh, hey, many
yeah.
visa bills to a psychologist.
Yeah, same here.
Right.
And
So many
it's
years of,
funny.
of figuring
Yeah.
shit out.
Yeah.
So I'm 51. It took me to probably my mid 40s till I started to figure shit out. And lots of money later.
Yeah. That's money well spent though.
A
And
hundred, no regrets. No,
exactly.
no, it's called learning in life. So it's called learning in life. So 15 years ago,
Yeah.
you wake up and you decide it's time to make some change to your life.
Yeah. And I wish it was that simple, but ultimately it was my wife who sat me down and we were basically discussing what life was going to look like to co-parent our children, as they say. It's this idea of me moving out because there
Mhm.
was no way. She was just at her breaking point. She's our
Yeah.
kids at the time were 4 and 6, and at that age, they really are sponges. They pick up on things. They start to conceptualize and better understand things, especially like innuendos and whatnot. And my wife's, there's no way in hell that we're raising our kids in this kind of an environment. And I wasn't a bad drunk, okay? I mean, full
Yeah.
disclosure here, and even in my TEDx talk, I open and I share my nickname was Fun Guy Die. Like people
Yes.
wanted to hang out with me and party for such a big part of my life from age 17 onward, because I was someone that dealt with a lot of social anxiety and I still have my moments. I still have some mental health challenges that I continuously manage and I navigate as well as I can. It's actually why I choose to live a life the way I do. It's to keep me in a better headspace, better physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, all that good stuff. And we can get to that later. Back then, I didn't have the language nor the understanding to be able to communicate what I was feeling challenged by. And so I would just bottle things up. I'd suppress things and I
Mhm.
would avoid it. And it got to a place where my ego and my identity basically were solidified as that fun guy die. I believe that's who everybody wanted to hang out with, and that's who people valued.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
me, sober version of me, I really didn't feel connected with people. And it was my own fault. Like I was limiting getting vulnerable with people because I didn't understand how to get vulnerable. How do you open up? And every time I did that, especially with another guy, I'd be like, nah, man, you eye the guy up and say, you might use this against me. Like, you might be competition. I just felt so uncomfortable being authentic and vulnerable with other men and even women, like this period. It was a skill I didn't have. And at 15 years into just drinking, and that because I found if I drank, people liked to hang out with me. I could avoid all this self-talk and negative self-talk that was in my head. It would get really quiet when I would drink. I'd feel really cool. And just I thought that was the kind of life I wanted. And it got to a place where this idea of who I wanted to be and this idea of who I was showing up as, they were so far apart, and this chasm that's created. And this is what I think people can relate to. And Keith, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. We all have an idea of who we're evolving or we intentionally want to evolve into, a certain type of person with certain type of values, a certain type of father, a husband, a business
Mhm.
owner. And who I was showing up more often than not was so far removed from this idea of who I always thought I was, living into.
Living into.
It created all this guilt and shame. And man, when you've got this chasm separating these two parts, all I can think about is maybe I can fill the chasm with stuff and eventually create a bridge. I'll just fill it up. But it was filling it with empty things that provided really no value to me. And to be fair, it wasn't making a big impact in the world as well. It was really a lot of superficial stuff. And
Yeah.
I my wife, and this is the summary of the whole thing. I'm going to leave this with you,
Mhm.
Keith, because anybody's
Mhm.
listening to this, I want them to know if they relate to this. But my wife sat me down. We're talking about divorce. I'm thinking about my business partners, and I'm thinking about, geez, everything's going to fall apart. She looks at me and she's, Di, are you being the type of man that you would want to marry your daughters?
Aye.
And that was it.
Yeah.
That was it. It was like that one question at that moment. Everything shifted. And that's what started a journey. And it was hard as hell. And full disclosure, we can get into that if we want, but it was a really hard change to navigate because I didn't know how to do it. I didn't feel good about who I was.
I can't imagine how difficult it was to wake up and say, I need to make a change and then do it day after day after day. And don't tell me there wasn't mistakes along the way because you wouldn't be human.
Dude, tons, tons.
Yeah.
And to be fair, the first, I'd say 6 to 12 weeks were the hardest because
Yeah.
I started to realize too, all my social connections, who what I believe were my friends, they were all based on this pretense of alcohol, right? Like we always had alcohol present. Go watch UFC at the pub on a Friday or Saturday night. Maybe go
Mhm.
golf and we hang out at the 19th green for the evening. And there was just all these habits that we had or lifestyle habits that were always gravitating around alcohol. And so all of a sudden I remove alcohol from my life. I'm still trying to participate with this social group, but I realized I get in there 1 or 2 rounds later, I was not connecting. In fact, I
Yeah.
felt even more empty than I did before when I was drinking.
Yeah. Yes.
And then that was like, oh gosh, now what do I do? Am I going to lose all my friends because I've just chosen not to drink? Can I not have both? Can I be a non-drinker and have a great social network?
And they're wondering where
I didn't
fun
think I
dies.
could.
Yeah, and they're wondering where fun dies, right? So while you're sitting there trying to be fun, they're going, "Where's that guy? Where's the fun guy that was here 3 weeks ago?"
Yeah.
Yeah, nobody's connecting.
No, and it was challenging, but at the same time, I knew it was something I wanted because I only made a commitment with my wife and my kids. So it was really to myself more than anything, but I also wanted to share that
Sure.
with them because I wanted the accountability and the support. But I committed to 1 year without drinking. That was it. I'm just going 1 year. And I know there's people probably listening to this. Dude, come on. It sounds like you had a bit of a problem. 1 year's not going to do it. Believe me, that for me would be 12x, the longest I'd ever done in 15 years. If I
Yes.
only never done one
Yes.
month, like this is a big commitment.
Yes.
And I realized within the first couple months, I was going to need help. And I'll just share this little side story because I think this will give everybody hope, especially the men out there that struggle with opening up at times. I remember my wife and I sitting on the couch. It's about 2 months after I'd stopped drinking. And I'm a bit of a mess, right? It's just a mess because I have to relearn how to connect with people. I have to relearn how to be social. There's just all these things that I realized alcohol was helping me flood my way through it. And now that I didn't have alcohol, I was like, I guess I better learn how to do this sober and as myself. And I sat my wife down and she could tell that I was carrying this heavy load. She could just tell that I was pretty I was remorseful more so about myself and giving up alcohol, to be honest. Like it felt like I had just cut off, yeah,
Yeah.
or yeah, cut off a best friend. Like it was such a big part of my life and how I functioned. It was like being in a canoe without a paddle, right? Let's
Mm.
throw a Canadian reference in here, but it was quite
Yeah.
literally that moment. And I don't know what happened, but my wife just asked me ever so nicely, and she was giving me this attention, and my kids were asleep. So I don't know what came over me, Keith, but I just, bleh. I honestly, it was the first time in our 10 years of marriage at that point that I actually was fully open with her. And I just shared everything that was on my mind. And as they say, on my heart as well. Like I just talked about being a morbidly obese teenager and all the problems that I struggled with bullying. And this is a story I'd never shared with her before. I hadn't
Mhm.
told a lot of people about that at this point because, again, it was something I felt a lot of shame around when I was growing up as a teenager, being morbidly obese, having to deal with all those health issues. And
Mhm.
this went on for about 40 minutes. It was just verbal diarrhea. Like I was just literally dumping on my wife on the couch. And she just looked at me the whole time with kind and empathetic eyes. She would touch my lap, hold my hand, nod. Like she was just such a generous and caring listener at that point in time. And it was exactly what I needed. And I remember getting to the end of it and just being like, "Hmm." And she looks at me, Keith, and she's like, thank you for sharing that with me.
Mhm.
I love you. It's going to be okay. We're going to get through this. And then, no joke of a lie, about 5 seconds later, I think you need to talk to somebody. So it was like straight up, man. And it was the best thing she could have said because, as much as I was like, I just talked to you. What do you mean I got to go talk to somebody? I just told you everything. But she's, listen, I can be here to support you through this, but I can't be the one to help you work through this.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it was the most profound thing and accurate thing she could have said. And that's when I went out and found professional help. And it was a game changer.
When we talk about the business athlete performance lab die, we often refer to performance as the process.
Mm,
It's not about winning
yeah.
the cup or winning the Stanley Cup. It's the journey to get there. And
Yes.
this process for you, this performance process for you of living life, took a turn to see some therapy. Now, that in itself is a courageous decision that I know a lot of listeners on this
Mhm.
podcast are going, I'm not going to go talk to somebody. I don't want to go talk to somebody. I can share with you for somebody who's been,
Mm,
from somebody who's been, what an empowering experience from a human being to sit in a room with somebody who doesn't know you, who doesn't judge you, who doesn't really actually frankly care about you, and
mhm.
has a sole purpose but just to listen to you.
Yeah.
Does that not feel wonderful, Di?
It does. And it is a little scary at first too. Like I think it
Yes.
took me about maybe 4 or 5 sessions before I really started to get comfortable and it became actually very cathartic. Like
Yes.
there was a lot of release in that sharing, but also because you're right, it's an unbiased sounding board. Like they just take it all in and then they ask very intentional, very thoughtful questions that force you to introspect and to retrospect on your life. And like, because I'm usually a very present, but also thinking about what's coming tomorrow kind of guy. So I am more
Mhm.
on the anxiety side of things, less on the depression side. Depression often involves things that we can't change and things that already
Yes.
occurred. Anxiety is usually over the fear of what's coming or that lack of knowing. And I live more in the latter. And so it was
Gotcha.
neat though, because he was a guy that could guide me to explore my past in a way that was safe and really helped me unpack a lot of things and reframe things to better understand why do I have certain tendencies and beliefs now, 30 some odd years later. And he offered the support to be able to really take that apart and then rebuild it the way that I wanted to rebuild it.
Yeah. So then somebody who is anxious about what's coming in front of you,
Yeah.
going through that period of knowing that this Friday we're not going for drinks, next Saturday we're not going for drinks, that must have been anxiety hell for you.
It was, but to be fair, Keith, what I ended up doing was I got recommitted to my health and fitness because
Uh-huh.
I was starving and for control. That's really with
What it was.
anxiety, that's a big part, right? Is that we
Yes,
just
yes,
feel
yes.
lack of control. So I needed something to feel like I had some control again. And fitness has been such a huge part of my life. And some of the darkest moments has been the part that's at least allowed me to work my way through those moments because it's consistent. I know it's a great way for me to manage a lot of my emotions as well as through exercise and working out. And so I recommitted to this idea of what, oh, if I'm not drinking anymore and I have to start to explore new social connections and potentially create a new network and go through all these other changes on top of that, what is one activity I can do and do consistently that I
Mm.
know overall is going to make everything feel better?
If I'm taking my energy from over here, I need to put it somewhere and I'm
Yeah.
going to put it over here. Now, you mentioned growing up, you weren't the fit dude, I'm
No.
suspecting, who would happily take his shirt off in a
No.
video.
No
So,
way. Yeah,
yeah,
far from
yeah.
it.
So
Yeah.
I appreciate you sharing that. Again, I can relate to that story. And so my journey, perhaps similar to yours, was as I was trying to struggle to find my way. It was when I found this professional training facility where they trained athletes, and I was a business guy. And I'm like, no, I want to train like them because that's what I did. That's the structure and systems I desire.
Yes.
Clearly, when you moved from your life of fun die to now physical fitness, structure, systems guy, it was systems and structure that got you through the next 14 years until till today. Am I correct?
Yeah, especially the first few years were critical because like anything, and this is the nice thing about neuroscience, it's at least caught up to validate and prove that we can overcome certain habits that might be limiting our quality of life, like holding us back.
Yes. Yes.
We can override those old pathways, but it takes time and
Yeah.
consistency and frequency. And so I trusted that if I was consistent enough and I would just keep doing the little things day in, day out without any expectation that things have to change, but just trust that they will change. And that whole idea is like the 12-step programs, right? They're always talking about just one day at a
Mhm.
time, right? Like just focus on today, get through today. And so I started just really trying to look at today because if I let my anxious brain take over, I'd be thinking about 3 weeks out, 2 days out. Like it was overwhelming. And
Mhm.
so I just had to get back into my body and just get reconnected. And then on top of that, I started to really focus on personal development where before that, and Keith, maybe you can relate to this, but I was very biased to professional development. Anything that would move my professional ego and that status as far as career was concerned and network was concerned, I was going all in on that. I'd go to seminars and webinars and conferences, all geared on making me a better entrepreneur and business owner. But I didn't really do any of the work as far as how do I be a better man? How do I be a
Mhm.
better father, a better husband? And so that was something that then began shortly after giving up the alcohol. And that's where, because I had the space, I had the resources, I had the energy to allocate to this sort of development. And within a few years, everything started to shift to the point that I just became very clear that the path I was on professionally was no longer the path I wanted to be on. After being in a company that I co-founded for 17 years, I was like, you know what? I can't do this anymore. I need to do something else. I just and so that was scary. And I'm only bringing this up because I want people to know when you go through significant changes like what we're talking about today, Keith, it's not just that one thing changes. It does have a domino effect and will affect a lot of other areas in our lives. And I just want people to be aware that it's going to happen and it's not a
Well, it
bad
happens
thing.
over time, and it happens over time too, right, Di? Like, it's
Yes.
not just a week, it's
Yeah.
not a month, it's probably a number of years, right? Really, when
Exactly
you
right.
step back on it, it's a long period of time, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, it was about 5.5 years before I ultimately exited the company I was a part of. It was, but even then, I thought I was going to be there forever. My business partner was 20 years my senior. He was the
Yeah.
CEO. I was COO slash CMO, and we had a really good working relationship. had a vision for the company. We were scaling, things were going great. But I just became very disenchanted. I was like, I don't want to do this anymore. Like I just, and I was reminded, I don't know if you're familiar with this, and I'm sure you've come across it, Keith, but for anyone listening or watching, there's a wonderful keynote address to the graduating class of Stanford. And this is by Steve Jobs back in
Mhm.
2005, I think.
Mhm.
And
Before he passed, I'm
yeah,
familiar with
that's
it.
right. And it was actually, he was in remission for the first time. So he
Yep.
had pancreatic cancer. He goes into remission. And then a little time later, he's invited by Stanford to come and do the keynote address to the graduates. And so you got to think about this contextually. He's in remission when he's addressing them. So he's referring to what was going on in his life as he was navigating his cancer diagnosis. And the doctor saying, listen, you got to get your life in order. Like basically telling them, if you got anything left undone, time to do it now. And just how
Yeah.
it shifted his perspective. But he talks about this exercise that he does every morning as he's preparing to go to work, brushing his teeth, combing his hair, doing whatever he does. When he looks in the mirror first thing in the morning, he asks himself a question. If today was the last day I had on this planet, would I choose to do what I'm about to do this morning? Or, and his, what he shared was, if my answer was no more than 2 days in a row, I knew it was time to make some big changes. And so that became something that I've really just integrated into my own life, is asking that question. If today was my last day to be on this planet, would I choose to do what I'm about to do today? And
Mhm.
if I can't
Mhm.
honestly say, yeah, I have to ask myself, well, why not?
Exactly. Why
Yeah.
not?
Yeah.
And that's really the ambition with this show, is to give our listeners that encouragement or that empowerment, that if you're not answering yes to this question that Di's throwing out there, then maybe we're going to help give you the courage to make change. Change
Yes.
is difficult, man,
Oh,
especially when you
man.
choose it yourself.